studio. Today we're going to be working on something that really is a combination of both piecing and the fusible applique. This is called Blooming Blossom Table Runner, and what we're going to do is turn this into this. This is a beautiful table runner. We have several patterns available in these applique florals. Here are two of them here. This one is the blossoms, and I don't have the tag on this one. I will tell you in a second. But we're going to work on these today. We're going to both be doing the piecing and the applique. As we said, we're going to be working on a table runner today. I have the kit here for the Blossoms Braided table runner. That's this one here on my left, your right. And this particular kit has all of the components for the laser cut and prefused applique, but it also has all of the background fabric included. This will require some cutting and also some piecing with the sewing machine to get that background ready. So we're going to go ahead and start there with the ironing and cutting of the background fabric and getting these strips ready to go to the sewing machine. That's what we're going to do. One of the first things I'm going to do is go ahead and piece my paper pattern. The pattern has in the instructions here on your first page what sections to tape together first, and then how to tape those subsections together to create one long pattern. One of the reasons why the patterns are created this way is so that if you're doing a self-print pattern where you've downloaded this off of our website, you could go ahead and print this on regular printer paper and then go ahead and piece the pattern together yourself. So all we're going to do is cut on the dotted line here, and I'm going to use my rotary cutter that's marked paper. It's marked paper on both sides, and I'm going to do that with each of the sections just using my rotary cutter, mat, and ruler. It's always a three-part system. And I'm just going to cut that little zipped line right off of each of the pieces as it's illustrated on the pattern itself. And some of the pages will have a dotted line on two sides, so we'll have to cut each of those. And after we get all of those cut, then we can go ahead and piece them together. I know some people would probably stack these and try and cut all of them at once, but I'm not feeling that much bravado today, so I'm just going to go ahead and do it the slow way. I actually had this pattern sent to me, so I don't have the downloaded file where I could reprint a page if I made a mistake. So I'll do it the slow way. One of the nice things about purchasing something on the website, as long as you sign in when you're purchasing something online, if it's a download, you can go ahead and download that downloaded pattern again if you've lost it. That goes for digital files as well. If you've downloaded digital pantos and you switch formats because you've got a different machine, or you just simply lost the files that you had because of a computer corruption or something like that, as long as you logged in when you purchased it, you can go back in to your purchases and re-download that same item. Now this particular one doesn't have any dotted line on it, so I don't have to cut that one. So now I'm going to go ahead and lay out my pieces as they would according to the map on this first page. As you can see, I have my pieces laid out as they are in the pattern, section 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And I'm going to connect the even and the odd pages together, and then I'll join them all together. And you can do this either with Scotch tape or with a glue stick, or you could even do both. I'm just going to run a quick line of glue stick along there. And you can see from the design itself just how they connect. You could also be doing this by magic Scotch tape, whatever you have on hand, or you could do both. But you can see it goes together pretty quickly. And then it's just a matter of combining these two, these two, these two, and these two. And then you could use the, as I said, magic tape or the glue stick again. And before you know it, we'll have our whole pattern done. Using a combination of both the glue stick and the magic tape, I've gone ahead and taped my whole pattern together. I like the glue stick because it's repositionable until you get it flat. The tape sometimes can cause the paper to buckle, which it did here. Even though I had it glue stick, I put a little bit of tape and it's puckered a little bit, but I'm just going to leave it as it is because I think I can still proceed. But I'm going to set the pattern aside now and we'll move on to cutting the fabric for the background. From each of the fabrics in the kit, we're going to cut two 2.5-inch strips. And in this particular pile here, I have the background piece on the bottom, but I also have on top of it layered 2 other pieces, so I'm going to be cutting 3 different fabrics at the same time. The first thing I'm going to do is line up one of the lines on my ruler with the line on the table to make sure that my ruler is perfectly perpendicular to the lines on the mat, because I can't see underneath the fabric. I know if I get this lined up perfectly on the edge that I will be cutting straight as I go across. And this is really just to give me a fresh cut at the beginning. And I'm going to use the raw edge, or the edge that I've just cut, as my true line and continue cutting across. Now that's my fresh cut for to measure off of. And now I'm going to use my cut edge to give me my 2.5-inch. And in this particular case, because I'm using the edge of the fabric, I don't even have to have the fabric straight on a line anymore. And sometimes I will cut off of the line just to get save my mat some on the cutting. This particular ruler has a 1/2-inch addition, so I'm going over 1, 2, and 1/2. And I'm just using my raw edge, my cut edge, as my straight line. And that is 3 pieces of fabric that are each cut 2.5 inches. I'm going to do that one more time, and that will give me both of my pieces that I need from each fabric for these first 3 pieces. After this, I will go ahead and line up the rest of the fabric and repeat the process. I have my two sets of strips that I need to get all of my side strips from. And from this large background piece, I still need to get a 10.5-inch square. And that's going to be the center starting point for the whole process. So I'm just going to switch to a square ruler. And this has different markings on it, so I can just go ahead and line this ruler up with a 10.5-inch mark on both sides. And then I'm going to cut it, but I'm going to, oh good grief. For my background fabric, I already have cut my two strip sets that I need. Those were each 2.5 inches. Now I need a 10.5-inch square that is going to be the center for our braid as we piece outward from the center. So I'm just lining up the 10.5-inch mark on both sides of the piece, and then I'm going to use the edge of the ruler to get my two cuts out of it. The rest of this leftover piece is going to be for binding on the quilt. So now I have my 10.5-inch square, and I will just go ahead and finish my strips. This is my second set of strips. Again, there are 3 layers here. I ironed each one of these separately with best press. Got all the wrinkles out, laid the next one on top of it, sprayed it with best press, pressed it again, and then did the same with the third piece. Now the pieces are sticking together pretty good. I'm again going to use one of the lines on the mat to make sure that my ruler is perfectly perpendicular to the fabric, and I'm going to go ahead and give myself my first cut. Using the previous edge that I've cut, I'm just going to line that up with the ruler and keep cutting across until I have a clean cut all the way. Now I'm going to use the straight edge that I've cut with the 1/2 inch and then 2 increments on the ruler. I'm going to switch it the other way. I don't mind moving these because they're pretty well sticking together from pressing them all at once. So I'm going to line my 2.5 up on the ruler on the edge of the fabric and make my first cut. And I'm going to continue until I've cut all the way across. This is my first 2.5-inch set. I'm going to do one more from this, and the rest of this will be leftover. You can hold on to that in case you make a mistake, or if you need, you want to add a particular extra fabric from this piece of fabric over another. This is we're going to save in our leftover pile. And then we're going to cut subcut these, and each of the 2 strip sets we're going to cut into different increments, and we'll tell you what those measurements are. I'm just going to line one strip set up on top of the other, because with this large rotary cutter I can cut up to 6 layers at once. Because of the way these get pieced onto the side of the center square, kind of like a log cabin, the one side of the strips are going to have to be a couple inches wider than the other. So from this first strip set, I'm going to cut 3 units that are 10 3/4 inches, and I'm going to start by making a fresh cut here at the very beginning. There's my first 10 3/4. My second. My third. Now I can go ahead and cut my second strip. The second strip set, we're going to cut them 12 3/4. So I can get those stacked up on top of each other the same way I just did the previous set. The nice thing about this pattern is, and the fact that it's a table runner, is none of these seams are going to be touching anything else in the project. So if our seam isn't exactly perfect, if our cutting isn't exactly perfect, it's not going to have a detrimental outcome to the project, because we trim off the 2 side edges, and the length of the table runner isn't an absolute. So if you were off a little bit in your piecing or your cutting, it's not going to affect the finished project, because nobody knows what size the table runner was supposed to be to begin with. So this set we're going to do 12 3/4. And I'm just using the 1/4 inch hash marks on my ruler to help me get that lined up. The first one would be 3/4, the second one would be the 1/2 inch mark, and the final one is just going to be a 1/4 mark past the main line on the mat. And I made a mistake on that one. So I'm going to use my extra strips and cut me one more strip of fabric so that I can get the pieces I need from it. And that was my original set. So I'm going to go ahead and cut these and get them added to my set, and then we'll move on to piecing. Even with the mistake that I made in the one strip set, I had enough leftover fabric that I was still able to go ahead and cut a whole nother strip and get those out of there. I still have all of my center block fabric that'll be left over for the binding if I choose to use that as the binding. So I have my 3 stacks at 10 3/4 and my 3 stacks at 12 3/4. Each of them are 2.5 inch strips, and I have my center square done as well. So I can take all of this down to the sewing machine and get started on the piecing, and I'll just leave my scraps up here for the time being because I don't need those down in the sewing area. I've had a couple days break in between the projects, so I'm ready to get back to it. Sometimes it's a little bit like, where did I lay off? One thing that I will say is I know I made a mistake in the cutting of the last 12 3/4 inch piece, but I had enough of the fabric left over to make up for that, so I have all of my pieces that I needed. Also, I'm not afraid to fail. What I do try and do is fail forward, so try and learn something from the mistake, but I'm not going to let a mistake get me down. It doesn't mean that I'm having a bad day, it simply means I made a mistake. So, and I've made plenty over my quilting career, and not much of a career that it is, but you know, you keep going. And in a project like this, there really aren't going to be any seams that are matching up. We're not putting blocks together, so there's very little that really could go wrong with this. If the table runner wasn't perfectly straight, it's not going to be the end of the world. One thing I'm going to do, just so that I get a variety of fabrics each time, well, I guess it doesn't really matter because they were cut in singles. If I had cut these in double layers, I might have sorted them into like fabric piles so that I could make sure that they're switched up. But because I cut all of these in single layers, they're going to be automatically mixed up at the ratio that they should be. So I can just go ahead and stack those into the two sizes. And obviously the first size that we're going to use is the smaller one, and this goes together similar to the way a log cabin block would. We're just going to line up the edge of one of my strips with the edge of one of the sides of the corner block, and we're going to just get those lined up together. You could pin these if you wanted. You could also run just a little bead of glue stick right in the seam allowance and get that going. But these have a little bit of extra length to them, so I should be plenty fine with that. I'm just going to get my first piece lined up, and off I go. Now, I'm going to need to iron these. I could be doing the opposite side of this as I go and keep working it that way, do the two opposites. But just for clarity, I'm just going to go ahead and show you that I'm going to iron this seam open, because when I lay my larger piece on here, the 12 3/4 inch piece, I need that seam to be perfectly flat. You could finger press if that's your go-to, but I'm actually going to iron in between because this is a fairly small project and I want it to be nice and crisp for those applique components later. So I'm going to set my iron up and iron these, and I'll show you my next strip. I always like to do a top seam setting press when I'm about to iron open a seam. It's just the class is the training that I had. I've always heard that it sets the seam, and I'm lifting up that strip that I sewed onto the block and I'm ironing that out. That way the seam allowance is going away from the inside of the block, and I won't get any shadow of this fabric underneath this one when the project is finished. So I have this one piece done. Now I'm going to go ahead and align one of the 12 3/4 inch strips on this side, and we'll continue on creating that braid. You can see that I have my seam sewn here and ironed open, and now when I lay out one of the strips, and I'm just going to flip those upside down so I'm sewing in the opposite direction of the fabrics, these now match the length of the fabric that I need. So I'm going to just go ahead and lay this on top, and because this batik is this kit is made out of batiks, there is no right or wrong side really, so I don't have to worry about that. But had this been printed fabric, we always sew with our right sides facing each other, just like we talk to people, we talk to them facing each other, and that's how we would sew fabric together. But since these have no actual face, either side will work. Again, you could pin here if you felt you were going to get some kind of distortion. And now you have this seam here. You can see we'll just go ahead and iron this open after we press the seam to condense the seam itself. And we're just going to continue using these strips as we go all the way out towards the end of the banner. Now we have our 10 3/4 inch strip and our 12 3/4 inch strip attached to our center square. We're going to add another one of the 10 3/4 strips, but we're going to make sure it lines up at this corner, not down at this bottom. And that looks a little bit funny right now, but once we get all the pieces in place and lay the ruler on it, you'll see how the excess gets trimmed off and how it does give us a finished edge. Now we have two of the 10-inch pieces and one 12. It's time to add another one of the 12 3/4 inch pieces. So again, we're going to line that up to this point here and not worry about this edge that doesn't go down all the way, because that's all going to get trimmed off in the end. So in this case, I think I might flip it over. I could have sewn it from the other edge, but as you can see, as we go, we're going to be creating these jagged edges, but don't let that worry you, because we are going to trim that off. So I'm going to go ahead and press this seam open and go back to my 10-inch size. This process will continue on until I have 8 strips on this side and 8 of each size, and then I'll go ahead and finish with 8 of each size on the other side, and that will be the completion of this table runner. I'm at the halfway point. I have my center block and I have 8 sets or pairs on each side, so it doesn't matter which way you count, there's 8 on each side. So I'm 1/2 of the way finished, so now I can flip this over and start the process again. I'll start with 10 3/4 inch strip and then the 12, and I'll just keep alternating those until I get to the end of the strips that I have available for this kit. As you can see, I have my center square, and in each direction I have 8 strips or 8 strip sets to create the braided pattern for the table runner. Now in either case, you could finish here just as it is if you were using really decorative fabric, but we're going to proceed and use it for the base for laser cut applique that came in the kit. One thing that you'd want to do before you proceed is to go ahead and trim off the little jagged edges, and the way that you would do that is by putting a 1/4 inch mark right on the tip of the square, the center square, and go ahead and trim your block, your strip set, so that you have a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around. Then you can go ahead and cut off these edges. You can either do that with a long ruler, or you could use one of the square rulers to make sure that you are cutting perfectly perpendicular to the angles here. I'm not going to cut on this particular surface because it's my ironing surface, and actually I'm going to go ahead and proceed to the next step of laying out my applique, because what I'm going to do when I cut my edges off is go ahead and run stay stitching around the full perimeter just because these are biased edges and we wouldn't want them to distort. Right now they're not going to go anywhere because I haven't cut them, but once I cut them the entire edge is biased, and I don't want it to ripple as I'm handling it. So I'm going to go ahead and get my light box set up, and then we'll proceed to getting my pieces laid out for the applique. As you can see, the reference point for the table runner itself is the center square. After that, there are no more reference points for the placement of the pieces. So I want to take my time and get the center square lined up with that reference point on the paper pattern, and then I feel like I can proceed outwards from there. So I have this positioned, my paper, my table runner is even on the pattern itself, so now I can go ahead and lay out my applique pieces, and I'm going to pull over the color cover sheet to help get the placement correct. I have my center pieces laid out, and I think I'm just going to start from there. But you can see that I have laid out all of my like pieces together on my ironing surface so that I know where they are when I go to look for them. But because the pattern is long and my light box is not as long as the pattern, I'm going to start from the center and work to the right, and then I'll work to the left after I get that finished. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the center. We'll do our peel, place, and press, but they're already kind of in place. I'm just going to be lifting them up as I go and peeling the paper backing off and getting them in place. I'm going to start with some of the pieces that are usually a little bit trickier, and these little curvy spines take a little bit of practice to get them exactly where you want them. Sometimes I will just kind of curl under one of the ends, and usually the paper will just pop off. As we have said many times, this product comes laser cut with the fabric as you see it on the kit cover, and it has the fusible already applied to the back during the manufacture process, and then it is laser cut once we get the fusible backing on it. The fusible backing that we use is Steam 2. Once I get these long, slender, curvy pieces in place, then I can go ahead with some of the larger pieces and continue putting those on as well. These long, slender pieces can be a little bit tricky to get them in place, but usually once you start, they will follow the curve on the pattern nicely. And because we use that Steam 2, the fusible material is tacky to the touch, so it will stay in place as we're adding our other components to the pattern and getting ready for it to be fused. Generally, just the heat of your hand is enough to really get that to hold into place, even if you're moving the table runner around. Now there are two different size leaves, and just to make sure you don't run out, you want to make sure you're getting the right size, and you can almost see the whole outline on the pattern around the size that you're meant to use. So that is one way to make sure you're getting the right size. Sometimes I forget how beautiful these patterns are until you start working with them up close. I love the bright batik in here. It really pops on the background. Well, this whole kit is batik. The table runner and all of the applique. Now this bottom part of the flower overlaps the bottom of the flower, and you can tell that because there's a dotted line there. So I was going to put down the bottom first, but I see that it goes over top. So I lifted that piece up, and I didn't realize it, but I think there are two different versions of that bottom. So I'm going to put the one I peeled off just to the side. And that really makes a difference when you're putting those down. So you do want to pay attention as you're placing these. But all we have to do is peel the paper backing off, place the applique component where it goes, and then we can press later. So peel, place, and press. We have a variety of these little round shapes that would be the stamen of the flower, and you can choose to match those to the flower. I'm doing a contrast as it shows in the main pattern. I'm going to continue to place those bases right on the pattern to make sure I have the correct one each time. If we use one out of place, that means we're going to have a second one out of place at some point because of where it was taken from. If you have young ones in the house, this might be something fun for them to do. It would be a little game of dexterity to try and get the applique shapes in place, sort of like a puzzle. Or you could use their help in just aligning up the similar items together so that you can get started on your pattern, just as I've done here with lining up all of my left and right shapes of each flower with the corresponding color. So all of my right blues, all of my left blues, right orange, left orange, and so on. All of the flowers and leaves and stems are all directional. A lot of times we use mirror imaged shapes like this because once we have them programmed into the manufacturing computer for laser cutting, it's easy just to flip them. But that also gives you a beautiful variety of shape so that you have a lot of interest and motion in the quilt. Now I have the center component done, and it doesn't matter which way I go, but since I have most of my pieces laid off to this side, I'm going to slide the pattern down this way, and I'll lay out my next section, and I can move some of these flowers down this way a little bit. I meant to try and pull the paper simultaneously with the top, but it got a little bit shifted. Now I can go ahead and lay out my next section as far as I want to go. I don't have to worry about these that I've peeled off falling off because they are sticky to the touch, and I can go ahead and overlap that off the table and they'll stay right where they are. I have all of the next section laid out, and I just want to make sure that the pieces I've already placed down are aligned, and then I can go about the process of just peeling off the paper backing and getting these pieces in place. I've gone ahead and moved all of the pieces, the whole kit off of the table here to the side because I was getting confused as to which pieces I had put down and which pieces were yet to come. It's really quite a relaxing process. You can just take your time I don't stress myself out with perfection. So I get the pieces fairly close to where they're supposed to be, because once the paper pattern's gone, no one's going to be able to see if my leaf is off a little bit. And every leaf, or every vine, every garden is going to be a little bit different. The flowers may be perfect, but their placement may be off a little bit to one side or the other. There went my cover. I'm not going to stress over that either. And this is the nice thing about the pieces. They are repositionable. And that one was being a little bit contrary with me. If you ever have a problem where the paper isn't peeling off, you can always score the back of the paper with a seam ripper or with the head of a pen. I usually keep a pen right here, tucked in the side of my ironing cover. But if you just score the back of the paper and then bend it, you can peel that paper right off. I don't know if it has to do with the perfection of the way that they do the steam seam in the manufacturing process, or if my climate here plays into that, but for me the paper always peels off fairly easily and I don't have to resort to a pen or a seam ripper. I'm going to continue on, and I'll get back to you when we have some more of these in place and we're getting ready for the ironing process. Because I know this is a little bit like watching the rain fall. It's very relaxing to do it. I'm not sure if it's relaxing to watch. Well, I'm down to the finish line. This is the second side of the table runner, and I just have a few of these flower bases to put on, and then I'll be finished. Now all of these pieces are just placed in position right now. They're not fused in place. So after I get done placing these where I want them and making sure they're correct to an extent, then I will go ahead and get the iron ready, and then we'll fuse these. I think I've got 2 more left. Now we'll go ahead and pull the paper pattern out and put the light box away, and I'll double check to make sure everything's in place, and then we'll get the iron set up and we'll go ahead and fuse these. Well, with very little time, very little effort, with a little bit of time, we went ahead and completed the braided table runner. And using the pattern and the laser cut pre-fused applique, we have all of the components in place. The only thing left at this point in the process is to go ahead and fuse the laser cut applique that are already pre-fused to the background. Now we do use Steam 2, and that requires a component of steam to activate that adhesive. We also have the hot iron. What I do is keep moisture in a spritz bottle like this. I don't keep water in my iron, that way the iron doesn't leak. And I'm just going to start one section at a time, and I'm going to moisten the top of the applique with my mister bottle. I think I'll go all the way to the center. And I'm probably overdoing it on the amount of moisture at this point, but I always like to make sure I get it. And then I'm going to use a Teflon pressing sheet. You can buy these in a variety of sizes. I happen to have a fairly long one because I do all kinds of projects here in the studio. And the reason I like to use the Teflon pressing sheet is because sometimes I get lazy and I'll push the iron from side to side without lifting it up and just pressing down. If you do that while you're working with fusible shapes, you could catch the edge of the applique shape and scrunch it up, and then you have it under the iron and you're fusing a scrunched piece, and there's no way to salvage that because once you fuse it, it's really not going to come back up. So I use the Teflon pressing sheet as a way to protect from scrunching up my applique shapes, but also it does offer a layer of protection against scorching your fabric. I do have to account for time. I have to add a little bit of time to the ironing process to make sure that the heat has time to transfer through the Teflon pressing sheet, through the applique fabric, and to the middle where that fusible web is. And so usually 8 to 10 to 12 seconds, 15 seconds, you can test for yourself with your own iron. That is going to certainly depend on your heat settings. I know for myself, if I moisten that applique fabric down pretty good and the applique is dry when I finish, that I've had a chance to activate that Steam 2. If the iron has dried the fabric, then I know it's also fused the applique shape. Once I get the entire table runner fused from the top, I will go ahead and flip that over, and I will re-moisten the back where those applique shapes are, and I will re-iron. That way I am absolutely certain that the fusible web is completely fused with both pieces of fabric, and we're not going to have any problem with some of it lifting up. If you have gumming on your needle while you're doing top stitching of a design or quilting of a design, that's an indication that you haven't fused properly enough, and there's loose adhesive that can come through and adhere to the needle. If it is fused completely to both sides of the fabric, there isn't any residual adhesive that's going to come through and gum up your needle. So I'm just going to continue on this process until I get the whole top done, and then we'll flip it over and we'll do the back side. Well, I have the two samples here of our completely finished and quilted table runners and the two patterns that we have on our website. And then I also have the finished top for the one that I created today. They really do go together really simply. The base table runner pattern is very nice, that braided table runner, and it's really beautiful. You could put any kind of seasonal applique on there, and we have a huge selection of applique on the website, urbanelements.com. So I want to thank you for stopping by today. Just remember that a lot of these patterns for the applique are available as SVG files or as paper downloads, self-print at home. We also have them in kits in both batik and traditional fabric. So thank you for coming in today, and we'll look forward to seeing you again next time.